Here we go. One step at a time, don't be living on the line.
Today's lesson is all about monopolistic competition. Today we're going to define and discuss the market structure that is monopolistic competition. We'll identify some examples of industries that are monopolistically competitive, and we'll analyze the demand, marginal revenue, and the costs of production as seen by a monopolistically competitive firm to determine the level of output and the price that will result in both the short run and the long run in a monopolistically competitive market. So in previous lessons, we have discussed two other market structures up to this point. We have learned about perfect competition, which is a market in which there are thousands of identical sellers selling a homogeneous product, in which firms are price takers, face horizontal demand curves, and earn zero economic profits due to the very low barriers to entry. On the other extreme of the spectrum of competition, we've discussed pure monopoly, a market structure in which there is a single seller selling a unique product and enjoying the benefits of high entry barriers, meaning that the firm can earn economic profits in the long run due to its price-making power. Now, monopolistic competition is actually closer to the perfectly competitive market than it is to the monopolistic market. Some of the characteristics that exist in monopolistically competitive markets include a large number of sellers selling slightly differentiated products. Now, differentiated is a term that means simply different. Unlike perfect competitors, monopolistic competitors sell products that aren't the same as every other firm. An example of this might be a restaurant that sells Mexican food. Mexican restaurants are not the same as Italian restaurants, for example, or Thai restaurants. Mexican restaurants differentiate their food by producing a certain type of food. So the restaurant industry is actually a good example of a monopolistically competitive industry. Now, another characteristic of monopolistic competition is that entry barriers exist, but are very low. It is quite easy to open a monopolistically competitive business. The costs of getting into the industry are quite low. Therefore, firms will enter the industry if economic profits exist. Now, another characteristic is that since the firms are differentiating their output slightly, each firm has some price making power. Now, this implies that each individual firm faces a downward sloping demand curve. This is in contrast to perfect competition, in which firms are price takers, and therefore each firm faces a horizontal demand curve determined by the price in the market for its product. Next, we can say that due to the low barriers to entry that exist, economic profits are unsustainable in the long run. Just like in perfect competition, if economic profits exist, firms will be attracted to the market. The demand as seen by the individual firms in the market will fall, and therefore the price that they can ultimately sell their output for will fall due to the original economic profits that may have been earned in the short run. So economic profits cannot be earned in the long run because the entry barriers are low and entry eliminates profits. Finally, we can say that due to the price-making power of monopolistic competitors, neither allocative nor productive efficiency will be achieved in the long run. So let's get into our graphical analysis of monopolistic competition. We can actually illustrate a graph for an individual firm in monopolistic competition based on some of the characteristics that we've just identified. For example, the fact that firms differentiate their products imply that they'll have some price-making power, and that the demand that each individual firm will face is downward sloping. So we can start by drawing a downward sloping demand curve. Now, this is in contrast to the perfectly elastic horizontal demand curve seen by an individual firm in perfect competition. It looks more like a monopolist demand curve. It's downward sloping, meaning that the firm can charge high prices and sell small levels of output, or can charge low prices and expect to sell very high levels of output, as we can see here. There's an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded for an individual firm's output in monopolistic competition. Next, we can examine marginal revenue for a monopolistically competitive firm. Since these firms are generally going to be single price sellers, price discrimination will be very difficult under monopolistic competition due to the fact that the firms don't have a huge amount of monopoly power. So a single price seller in monopolistic competition, just like a single price monopolist, as we have shown in previous lessons, will have a marginal revenue curve that lies below its demand curve, meaning that at any level of output, the firm's marginal revenue will be lower than the price it's selling its output for. So let's draw a marginal revenue curve that is connected to demand at a level of output equal to 1, but slopes down twice as steeply as demand due to the fact that the seller must lower its price in order to sell additional units of output. Its marginal revenue will always fall faster than the price of its good. So now we have the basic foundation for a monopolistically competitive firm diagram. We've got the demand curve, we've got the marginal revenue curve. All that's missing, of course, is our cost curves. So let's go ahead and draw a marginal cost curve. Now, marginal cost for a monopolistic competitor looks just like it does for any other firm. The shape explained by the law of diminishing marginal returns. Next, we can draw an average total cost curve. And I'm just going to go ahead and draw an ATC curve anywhere on this graph, making sure that the relationship between ATC and MC fits with everything we know about the cost that a firm faces. So once again, ATC must intersect marginal cost at its lowest point. Now what we have is a graph for a monopolistic competitor in the short run. We can show that following the profit maximization rule of produce where marginal cost equals marginal revenue, the monopolistic competitor will want to produce at a quantity where MC equals MR, which is right here. We'll call that QMC for the monopolistic competitor's quantity. And it can charge a price that corresponds with demand for that quantity of output. So just like we showed in a monopoly diagram, the price the firm will charge is found by going above the profit maximizing quantity up to the demand curve and then over to the price axis. And to determine whether or not this firm is earning economic profits, we can go up to the average total cost curve and over to the price and cost axis, and we can see that at its current level of output and price, our firm is earning economic profits equal to P minus ATC. So we have a rectangle here representing the firm's profits. So far, this looks just like a monopoly diagram, and that's exactly what it should look like. These firms are price makers. They face a downward sloping demand curve. Marginal revenue will always be less than price. And if they are successfully differentiating their products, the firms should be able to earn economic profits in the short run, as we have shown in this graph. But now is where things get a little bit different than pure monopoly, because another characteristic of monopolistic competition is that entry barriers are low and that economic profits cannot be earned in the long run. So using our diagram, we have to show that in the long run, these profits will be eliminated. So we're going to do that now. How would this look in our graph? And why would these profits be eliminated? Well, let's give an example here. Let's go back to our Mexican restaurant. Let's say that a Mexican restaurant opens in the city of Zurich, for example, where I live. Zurich doesn't have a lot of Mexican restaurants. If a Mexican restaurant opened here, I can't help but think that due to its highly differentiated product, the restaurant might actually earn economic profits. But this is a market in which the entry barriers are very low. If one Mexican restaurant came in and started earning economic profits, as we see here, it's one of hundreds of restaurants in the city, so it's not a pure monopolist. It's providing food just like all the other restaurants, but that particular type of food is earning it large economic profits. So we would expect that other restaurants would start making Mexican food. And as they did, the demand for this restaurant's meals would start to decrease. So let's show what happens when new firms enter the market for Mexican food. We can expect that this demand and marginal revenue will no longer be enjoyed. There will be a lower level of demand for our individual firm here due to the fact that there is more competition in the market for Mexican food. So I'm going to clean up this graph a little bit, get rid of our original demand curve, and show what happens when demand decreases, and we'll find our new equilibrium level of output and price following the lower level of demand, that occurs as new firms enter this market. So here we are, we've got the firm's costs, and we can expect that when profits were being earned, new firms were attracted to the market. And what happens now? There are more substitutes in the Mexican food market in Zurich, Switzerland. If there are more substitutes, then demand will decrease for this individual restaurant's meals, and it will become more elastic. The number of substitutes is the primary determinant of price elasticity of demand. As there become more substitutes for Mexican meals, demand will decrease and it will flatten out compared to the original level of demand. Along with demand, marginal revenue will decrease as well. Marginal revenue and demand are equal at a level of output of 1. Therefore, the marginal revenue curve shifts to the left and downwards and becomes flatter. We now have a new level of demand. We'll call this D1, and marginal revenue, we'll call that MR1, that is lower than the original level of demand. How do I know this demand is lower than the original level? Well, because as we can see, there are no longer any economic profits that are being earned. It's now impossible for a monopolistic competitor to earn economic profits. Let me show you why. The firm will want to continue to produce at the quantity where MC equals MR. This is the profit maximizing level of output. We can actually see that that is now at a slightly lower quantity because we left our dot behind from the original MR curve. So the quantity that the individual restaurant will produce has decreased. We'll call this QMC1. At the new quantity, due to the lower level of demand, the price that the restaurant can sell its meals for has decreased as well. There's more competition, and consumers are now more responsive to this restaurant's prices because there are more substitutes. So the price that the restaurant can sell for has also decreased. We can actually see that before the original price was up here at P1, now we have a price down here at P2. The decrease in demand for the individual restaurant's meals causes the restaurant to produce a smaller quantity and charge a lower price. Next, we want to determine whether or not a restaurant is still earning economic profits. And as we can see, it is not. Because at this price, let's just zoom in here, put a big red dot there, we can see that the price equals the average total cost. So we can look over here and we actually say that ATC equals price in the long run due to the entrance of new firms. If price equals average total cost, then essentially there are zero economic profits. And that fits with our characteristics of monopolistic competition. Economic profits cannot be earned in the long run. So how do we draw this graph to make sure we always show that zero economic profits will be earned in the long run in monopolistic competition? Well, look closely at what we've done here. We've shown that in the long run, the entrance of firms will assure that if profits are earned, they will be eliminated. This restaurant's demand decreased until it is tangent to the ATC curve. So there actually has to be a tangency here. The demand curve is tangent to the ATC curve, meaning that at the profit maximizing quantity, the firm actually breaks even. There's no way for this firm to earn economic profits. If it reduces its output, let's say down here to Q0, you can see it would be earning economic losses because its ATC would be higher than the price right there. The ATC is greater than the price. If the firm increased its output to Q2, the same would be true. The firm would be earning economic losses because the ATC is greater than the price. The best a monopolistic competitor can hope to do in the long run is to produce at a level of output where ATC equals price, meaning monopolistic competitors will only break even in the long run. Now, this is just the fate of a monopolistically competitive firm. Of course, if entry barriers are low, anytime economic profits are being earned, those profits will likely be eliminated by the entrance of new firms. But the good news is that if losses were being earned, the barriers to exit are also low. So we could show a situation in which a monopolistic competitor is earning economic losses. If losses are being earned, individual firms would leave the market, increasing the demand for the firms that remain in the market until once again demand is tangent to the average total cost curve, and the firms that have remained are breaking even. Okay, we're going to now clean up our graph and we're going to look very closely at it to determine whether or not efficiency is going to be achieved in monopolistic competition. Okay, here I have redrawn my monopolistic competitor in its long run equilibrium. How do I know that this firm and this market are in a long run equilibrium? Well, I can simply draw the profit maximizing quantity, where MC equals MR, and see that at that quantity demand is tangent to the ATC. In other words, the price that the individual firms can sell their output for is equal to the firm's ATC. There's no reason for firms to enter or exit this market. Each firm is breaking even. There is no additional economic profits that can be earned. Therefore, new firms will not enter. So the next question is, are these firms efficient? We need to look at the graph very carefully to prove that neither allocative nor productive efficiency will be achieved by monopolistically competitive firms in the long run. So the reason for this is that, well, if we look very closely here, we can see that at the quantity that this firm is producing at, that each firm in this market is producing at, the minimum average total cost is not being achieved. So how do I know that? That's because marginal cost equals average total cost at its lowest point. So this right here is where ATC is minimized. In other words, that is the quantity that is productively efficient. I'll call that QPE for the productively efficient quantity. The firm is not achieving its productively efficient quantity. Due to its price making power, the firm will restrict its output, charge a slightly higher price than the minimum ATC, and therefore it will not be using its resources in the least cost manner. That is our definition of productive efficiency. The next question then is whether or not the firm in the monopolistically competitive market will be allocatively efficient. And to determine this, we must look at demand, which is a signal of marginal benefit. If marginal benefit equals marginal cost at the firm's profit maximizing quantity, then we can say that the firm is allocatively efficient. But let's look closely here. At this quantity, the firm's quantity, we can see that the marginal benefit to society is greater than the marginal cost to the firm. So the firm is not being allocatively efficient. It is restricting its output. It is producing something less than the socially optimal quantity in order to maximize its profits, in this case to break even. The socially optimal quantity, of course, is where marginal cost equals marginal benefit, which is at a slightly greater quantity. So we can put another quantity here and call that QSO, or allocatively efficient quantity. So there you have it. The monopolistic competitor will be neither allocatively nor productively efficient in the long run, simply due to the fact that it has a downward sloping demand curve and a marginal revenue curve that lies below demand. The firm will charge a price higher than its minimum average total cost, and it will be selling at a price that is greater than its own marginal cost, meaning that resources will be underallocated towards monopolistically competitive firms' output, even in the long run, even though the firms will not be earning economic profits in the long run. This should just reiterate the fact that the only perfectly efficient market structure is perfect competition. Only if demand were horizontal could it be tangent to the average total cost curve at its minimum point. So only in perfect competition will firms produce at their minimum ATC in the long run and sell at a price that is equal to their marginal cost in the long run. So that wraps up our lesson on monopolistic competition. This will probably be our only lesson on monopolistic competition. It's a very simple market structure to understand. It shares some characteristics of perfect competition, including a large number of sellers and low barriers to entry. But it also shares some characteristics with monopoly, such as downward sloping demand seen by individual firms, price making power, and product differentiation. But based on the low barriers to entry that exist, firms in monopolistic competition will only break even in the long run. So there's another characteristic that they share with perfect competitors. Drawing the graph is very tricky. We must be careful to show that demand is tangent to the average total cost curve. Your demand curve cannot cross your ATC curve when showing a monopolistic competitor in its long run equilibrium. If it did cross the ATC curve, then there would be the possibility of earning economic profits in the long run. But we know that due to the low barriers to entry, that this is not a possibility.